The train lurched forward just as Felicity Zimmerman's legs gave out beneath her, and she landed hard on something that was definitely not the empty seat she'd been aiming for. "Don't move." The words were a whisper, low and commanding, spoken directly against her ear with such absolute authority that her body obeyed before her exhausted brain could process what was happening. She froze, every muscle locking into place despite the mortification flooding through her. Under her, she could feel the solid warmth of someone's thighs, the expensive fabric of what had to be a very nice suit, and the unmistakable tension of a body coiled with restraint. "I'm so sorry, I didn't," she started, trying to push herself up, but a hand landed on her hip, firm and unyielding. "I said don't move." The voice was velvet wrapped around steel, and something in it made her heart stutter. "The train is still in motion. You'll fall again." He was right. The late-night express to downtown was notorious for its jerky starts, and through the window she could see the platform still sliding past. But that didn't explain why his grip on her hip felt like a brand, or why her skin was prickling with awareness despite the double shift she'd just pulled at the diner. Felicity had been on her feet for 16 hours straight. Her white sneakers were stained with coffee and grease, her blonde ponytail was falling apart, and she was pretty sure she still smelled like French fries. This was exactly the kind of humiliating thing that would happen at the end of a day like today. Of course she'd be too tired to notice someone in the seat before she collapsed into it. Of course it would be someone with a voice like dark chocolate and hands that felt like they could snap her in half without effort. The train finally smoothed out into its regular rhythm, and the hand on her hip loosened slightly. "You may move now." She scrambled up so fast she nearly fell again, catching herself on the pole as she finally turned to face the stranger she'd just used as a chair. The apology died on her lips. He was the most beautiful person she'd ever seen, and beautiful was entirely the wrong word. Striking, maybe, otherworldly. His hair was pure white, falling in perfectly styled waves around a face that looked carved from marble. His skin was so pale it almost seemed to glow in the harsh fluorescent lights of the train car, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of fresh blood, gleaming like rubies as they tracked her every movement. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year, and he sat with the perfect posture of someone who'd never slouched a day in his life. "I'm so sorry," she managed, gripping the pole harder as the train swayed. "I didn't see you. I've been working all day and I'm exhausted, and I'm sorry." Those crimson eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "You work at the diner, 3rd and Morrison." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "How did you—" He gestured slightly at her uniform, and she looked down at her grease-stained shirt with the faded logo of Millie's 24-hour diner embroidered over her heart. "Right. Not exactly mysterious." 16-hour shift? He asked, and there was something almost concerned in his tone. "Double shift. Marcy called in sick and I needed the money." She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe because he'd asked, or maybe because exhaustion had destroyed her filter. "I'm sorry I sat on you. Really. That's never happened before." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I imagine not." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the rumble of the train and the occasional announcement crackling through the speakers. Felicity should sit down. There were plenty of empty seats in the car at this time of night, but something kept her standing there, watching him, waiting for, she didn't know what. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing to the seat beside him, properly this time. "I should probably sit somewhere else after, Nonsense. Sit." It was another command, softer this time, but no less absolute. Felicity found herself sinking into the seat before she'd consciously decided to obey. She was too tired to argue anyway, and something about him made her feel strangely safe, despite how unsettling he was to look at. "I'm Felicity," she offered, because sitting in silence felt wrong. "Felicity Zimmerman." "Vladislav Nix," he replied, inclining his head in a gesture that seemed oddly formal, old-fashioned even. "Though I prefer Vladislav." "That's a beautiful name." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I mean, it's very unique. You don't hear names like that much anymore." "No," he agreed, something unreadable flickering across his perfect features. "You don't." The train rattled through a tunnel. and in the brief darkness before the interior lights flickered back on, Felicity could have sworn his eyes actually glowed. But that was impossible. Just a trick of the light, combined with exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. "You should not work such long hours," Vladislav said suddenly. "It's dangerous for a young woman to be out alone this late, especially in this state of exhaustion. You could barely stand." Felicity bristled slightly despite her fatigue. "I can take care of myself, and I need the money. Rent doesn't pay itself." "I meant no offense." He shifted slightly, turning to face her more fully. "Merely observation. You're pale, swaying, and you quite literally fell into my lap. These are facts, not judgments." "You're one to talk about being pale," she muttered before she could stop herself, then immediately wanted to sink through the floor. "I'm sorry, that was rude. I'm just tired and my filter is gone." To her surprise, Vladislav actually smiled. It was a small expression, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. "I suppose I'm rather pale, aren't I? Family trait. The white hair, too?" "Indeed. All the Nix bloodline share these characteristics." "It's beautiful," she said honestly, "like something out of a fairy tale. The kind with castles and princes," and she cut herself off, mortified. "Sorry, I'm babbling. I do that when I'm tired." "Don't apologize." His voice had gentled considerably. "I find your honesty refreshing. Most people are far less forthcoming." "Most people probably don't sit on strangers' laps on the train." "No," he agreed, and there was definite amusement in his tone now. "They don't." The train began to slow, and Felicity glanced out the window to see her stop approaching. Part of her didn't want to leave, which was insane. She'd known this man for all of 10 minutes, most of which she'd spent mortifying herself. But there was something magnetic about him, something that made her want to keep talking, keep sitting in his presence, keep basking in the strange sense of safety he projected. "This is my stop," she said reluctantly as the train pulled into the station. Vladislav rose smoothly to his feet, and she realized he was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a lean but powerful build evident even through the expensive suit. "Allow me to escort you home." "What?" "No, you don't have to do that." "I insist." He offered his hand, palm up, in another of those old-fashioned gestures. "It's late, you're exhausted, and I would rest easier knowing you reached your destination safely." "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed, those ruby eyes intense on hers. "But I would like to." There was something in the way he said it that made her heart skip, something that promised this wasn't just politeness or casual interest. She should refuse. She should tell him she was fine, walk away, and forget about the beautiful stranger with the white hair and red eyes. That would be the smart thing to do. Felicity took his hand. His skin was cool against hers, not cold exactly, but noticeably cooler than normal body temperature. Before she could comment, he was guiding her off the train and onto the platform with a hand at the small of her back, protective and possessive in equal measure. "I live about 3 blocks from here," she said as they climbed the stairs to street level, "in the old building with the red door." "I know it." Something in his tone made her glance at him sharply. "Have you been following me?" "No." He seemed genuinely offended by the suggestion. "I know this city well. I've lived here a very long time." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. It was past midnight, and this part of downtown was mostly deserted at this hour. Streetlights cast pools of yellow light every few feet, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. "So what do you do, Vladislav?" Felicity asked, partly because she was curious and partly because the silence was starting to feel heavy. "For work, I mean. That suit looks expensive. I manage the family business, investments, property holdings, that sort of thing." "Sounds fancy." "It can be tedious," he admitted, "though recent developments have made it more interesting." "Like what?" He was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "Let's say there have been some political complications within the family, disputes over territory and resources. Nothing you need to concern yourself with." It was clearly a deflection, but Felicity was too tired to push. They'd reached her building anyway, the shabby 3-story walk-up with its peeling paint and sagging fire escape that was a far cry from whatever mansion she imagined someone like Vladislav living in. "This is me," she said, fishing her keys out of her bag. "Thank you for walking me home. You really didn't have to." I wanted to. He stepped closer, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with something electric. Felicity Zimmerman, would you allow me to see you again? Her breath caught. Why? Because in 300 years, I have never had anyone fall into my lap quite so literally, and I find myself captivated. His mouth curved into that slight smile again. Because you're honest and unguarded, and you smell like coffee and cinnamon, and because when you look at me, you don't flinch. 300 years. The words rang in her ears, clearly a joke, but there was something about the way he said it so matter-of-fact, so sincere that made her wonder. I work tomorrow night, she heard herself say. Same shift, 5 to midnight. Then I will meet you when you finish. It wasn't a question. I'll be waiting at the train station. You don't have to. I want to. He reached out and tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, the gesture intimate and tender. Sleep well, Felicity. Dream safely. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between streetlights with a speed and grace that seemed impossible. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, as if he'd never existed at all. Felicity stood on her doorstep for a long moment, key in hand, trying to process what had just happened. She'd sat on a stranger's lap. He'd walked her home. He'd asked to see her again. He'd said 300 years like he meant it. His eyes were red and his skin was cold, and he moved like something not quite human. I'm losing my mind, she muttered, finally unlocking the door and trudging up to her third-floor apartment. Too many double shifts. Need to sleep. But as she lay in bed 20 minutes later, clean and exhausted, she couldn't stop thinking about crimson eyes and a voice like velvet and the way her heart had raced when he'd touched her hair. She dreamed of castles in darkness and a pale hand reaching for hers. The next night, Felicity spent her entire shift in a state of nervous anticipation. She spilled coffee twice, mixed up 3 orders, and earned a concerned look from Millie, the diner's owner, and her boss. You feeling all right, honey? Millie asked during the dinner rush, catching Felicity staring out the window for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. You seem distracted. I'm fine, Felicity lied, forcing a smile. Just tired still from yesterday. You work too hard. I keep telling you, you don't have to pick up every extra shift that comes along. I need the money, Millie. You know that. Millie sighed, her weathered face creasing with concern. I know, sweetheart. Just don't burn yourself out, okay? You're too young to be running yourself into the ground like this. Felicity promised she'd be careful, but her mind was already drifting back to the train station, wondering if Vladislav would actually be there. Part of her was convinced she had imagined the whole thing, or at least exaggerated it in her exhausted state. Maybe he hadn't been that beautiful. Maybe his eyes had been dark red-brown, not actual crimson. Maybe his interest hadn't been that intense. Maybe he wouldn't show up at all. The thought made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. Her shift ended at midnight, and she changed out of her uniform in record time, pulling on jeans and a clean sweater before grabbing her bag. Millie called out a goodbye as she left, and then she was walking the 2 blocks to the train station with her heart in her throat. He was there. Vladislav stood on the platform like a prince surveying his kingdom, perfectly still in another immaculate suit, charcoal gray this time, with a black shirt underneath. His white hair gleamed under the station lights, and when he turned toward her, those impossible red eyes locked onto her with such focus that she forgot how to breathe. Felicity. He moved toward her with that same liquid grace, and suddenly he was there, close enough that she could smell something crisp and cold, like winter air and old parchment. I'm pleased you came. You're here, she said stupidly. Of course, I said I would be. He offered his arm, another old-fashioned gesture that should have seemed ridiculous, but somehow wasn't. Have you eaten? I grabbed something during my shift. That's not what I asked. His tone was gently reproving. Have you eaten properly? Or did you survive on coffee and whatever scraps you could snatch between orders? She felt heat rise to her cheeks. The second one. Unacceptable. Come, I know a place. Vladislav, I'm not exactly dressed for anywhere fancy, and I probably still smell like the diner. You look perfect, he said firmly, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow, and you smell like coffee and honey and yourself. I find it quite pleasant. He guided her out of the station and down the street, not toward the commercial district with its restaurants and bars, but into the older part of downtown where the buildings dated back over a century. Felicity had walked these streets before, but never at night, and certainly never with someone like Vladislav. The shadows seemed deeper here, the streetlights fewer and farther between, but she didn't feel afraid. Not with his solid presence beside her, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. They stopped in front of an unmarked door set into an old brick building. Vladislav knocked twice, then 3 times, then once, in a pattern that seemed deliberately coded. The door swung open to reveal a dimly lit interior, and a tall woman with the same white hair and pale skin as Vladislav, though her eyes were a striking violet instead of red. "Vladislav," she said, her voice musical with an accent Felicity couldn't place. "You didn't mention you'd be bringing a guest." "This is Felicity Zimmerman," he replied smoothly. "Felicity, this is Tatiana. She manages this establishment." "A human," Tatiana observed, looking Felicity up and down with undisguised curiosity. "How unexpected." "Is there a problem?" Vladislav's voice had gone cold, dangerous even, and his hand tightened possessively on Felicity's. "Of course not, my lord." Tatiana stepped back immediately, bowing her head. "Please, come in. Your usual table is available." "My lord." The words echoed in Felicity's mind as Vladislav led her inside. The interior was beautiful and in Gothic sort of way. All dark wood and crimson velvet, with candles providing the only light. There were perhaps a dozen other people scattered throughout the space, and every single one of them had white hair and pale skin. Every single one of them turned to stare as Vladislav guided her to a private booth in the back corner. "What is this place?" Felicity whispered once they were seated. "A private club," Vladislav replied, gesturing to Tatiana, who had followed them. "Bring her whatever she likes, proper food, and bring me the usual." "Right away, my lord." When they were alone, Felicity leaned forward across the table. "Why does she keep calling you that?" "My lord?" Vladislav was quiet for a long moment, his crimson eyes searching her face as if trying to decide something. Finally he said, "Because that's what I am." "Felicity, there's something I need to tell you, and I ask that you listen with an open mind." Her heart started to race. "Okay. I'm not human." He said it calmly, matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. "I am vampire. King of the North American bloodlines, ruler of 13 territories, and I have lived for 347 years. Felicity stared at him. She should laugh. She should make a joke about too many movies or accuse him of pranking her. Instead, she heard herself say, "I know." Vladislav blinked, the first time she'd seen him look genuinely surprised. "You know? I mean, I didn't know, but I suspected. The eyes, the skin, the way you move, the things you say." She gestured around them. "And this place definitely screams Vampire Club. So either you're all part of some really dedicated roleplay community, or you're telling the truth. And you're not afraid." "Should I be?" She searched his face, remembering the way he'd walked her home, the gentleness in his voice, the protective hand at her back. "Are you going to hurt me?" "Never." The word was fierce, absolute. "I would destroy anyone who tried, including myself." "Then no, I'm not afraid." It was true, she realized. Sitting across from a vampire king in a secret club full of immortal predators, and all she felt was curiosity and a strange sense of rightness. "So, vampire, does that mean you drink blood?" "Yes." "And you can't go out in sunlight?" "Correct. It would burn me to ash within minutes." "Do you sleep in a coffin?" His lips twitched. "No, that's a myth. I sleep in a bed like anyone else, though I require less sleep than humans." "Can you turn into a bat?" "No, though I can move very quickly and my senses are far superior to human capabilities." "Holy water? Garlic? Crosses?" "Myths, all of them. Though certain blessed weapons can harm us, and we have our own vulnerabilities within our kind." Tatiana returned with a plate of food for Felicity, a beautifully prepared steak with roasted vegetables, and a crystal glass filled with dark red liquid for Vladislav. Blood. Felicity's stomach should have turned, but instead, she just watched as he lifted the glass in a small salute before drinking. "Do you kill people?" she asked quietly. "For the blood?" "No, not anymore." He set the glass down carefully. "There are donors, humans who provide willingly in exchange for protection and compensation, and there are blood banks for when donors are unavailable. The old ways of hunting and killing indiscriminately are outlawed in my territories. Those who break that law face execution. You've killed people, though, in the past. Yes. He didn't flinch from the truth. I was born in what is now Ukraine in 1679. I was turned during the vampire wars of the early 1700s, and I fought for territory and power like all of my kind. I have killed humans and vampires alike. I am not proud of all my actions, but I do not apologize for surviving. Felicity took a bite of her steak, chewing slowly while she processed this. Why tell me? You could have kept this secret. Because I want you in my life, Felicity Zimmerman, and that's impossible if you don't know what I am. His gaze was intense, burning. From the moment you fell into my lap, I knew you were meant to be mine. Call it fate, destiny, or the instincts of an immortal predator, but I cannot let you go. So you needed to know the truth. Meant to be yours, she repeated, her pulse quickening. That's pretty presumptuous. Is it? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something intimate and dark. Tell me you don't feel it too, this pull between us. Tell me you haven't been thinking about me since last night, that your heart doesn't race when I'm near, that some part of you doesn't recognize me the same way I recognize you. She couldn't, because it was all true. She had been thinking about him constantly, and her heart was racing, and sitting across from him felt like coming home after a long journey she hadn't known she was taking. I feel it, she admitted quietly. But Vladislav, I'm just a waitress. I work double shifts to make rent on a crappy apartment. You're a king, an immortal king. We're from completely different worlds. Then we'll bridge the gap. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his cool grip. I have wealth and power beyond measure, but it means nothing without someone to share it with. I've existed for 3 centuries, Felicity, and in all that time, I have never felt what I feel when I look at you. Don't ask me to walk away from that. Don't ask me to let you go. I'm human. I'll age. I'll die. There are ways, he interrupted gently. If you wanted. If we reach that point. But we don't have to think about that now. Right now, I'm simply asking if you'll give this a chance. Give us a chance. Felicity looked down at their joined hands, his pale skin against her warmer tone. This was insane. She'd known him for less than 24 hours. He was a vampire, a king, a creature who'd lived for centuries. She should be running, not sitting here holding his hand and feeling her heart do cartwheels in her chest. But when she looked up and met those crimson eyes, she knew she wasn't going anywhere. Okay, she said softly. Let's give it a chance. The smile that broke across Vladislav's face was like sunrise, brilliant and transformative. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture reverent and tender. You honor me, my dear Felicity. They talked for hours after that, Felicity eating while Vladislav told her about his world. She learned about vampire politics and blood laws, about the territories he controlled and the court he presided over. She learned that vampires could live for thousands of years if they weren't killed, that they were stronger and faster than any human, and that their society was based on ancient codes of honor and power. In return, she told him about her life, about growing up in foster care, about putting herself through community college while working multiple jobs, about her dreams of maybe one day opening her own restaurant. He listened to every word with complete attention, as if nothing in the world mattered more than her stories. It was nearly dawn when Vladislav finally insisted on taking her home. I need to return before the sun rises, he explained as they walked through the empty streets. But I'll see you tomorrow night? I work again, she said apologetically. Another double shift. I don't get a day off until Thursday. Then I'll meet you at the train station when you finish, every night. He stopped outside her building, turning to face her. May I kiss you, Felicity? Her breath caught. Yes. He cupped her face in his cool hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite gentleness, and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was soft, careful, as if he was afraid she might break. But when she made a small sound and pressed closer, his control slipped slightly, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vladislav rested his forehead against hers. "You're going to be the death of me," he murmured. "Pretty sure you're already dead," she teased breathlessly. "Undead," he corrected, smiling against her lips. "There's a difference." He kissed her once more, quick and sweet, then stepped back. "Go inside, sleep. I'll dream of you." "Do vampires dream?" "This one will." She watched him disappear into the pre-dawn shadows, then floated up to her apartment feeling like she was living in a fairy tale. A dark, bloody, vampire fairy tale, but a fairy tale nonetheless. The next week passed in a blur of work and stolen moments with Vladislav. True to his word, he met her every night after her shift, and they would walk through the city together or sit in the vampire club while she ate and he sipped blood, and they talked about everything and nothing. She learned his favorite era was the Renaissance, that he'd met countless historical figures, and that he hated modern technology despite being forced to use it for business. He learned that she was terrible at math, but excellent at cooking, that she'd always wanted to travel but never had the money, and that her favorite flowers were gardenias, even though she'd only ever seen them in pictures. On Thursday, her day off, she woke to find a delivery person at her door with an enormous bouquet of gardenias and a note in elegant script. "For my darling Felicity, wear something comfortable tonight. I have a surprise. V." The surprise turned out to be a car, an actual luxury car, with a driver that picked her up at sunset and drove her out of the city. They traveled for nearly an hour before pulling up to what could only be described as a castle. It rose from the landscape like something out of a Gothic novel, all stone towers and arched windows surrounded by high walls and iron gates. "Welcome to Nick's Manor," Vladislav said as he appeared at her car door, offering his hand. "My home." Felicity climbed out slowly, staring up at the massive structure. "You live in a castle." "I am a king," he said with amusement. "Where else would I live?" He led her inside, through hallways lined with paintings and tapestries that were probably worth millions, past suits of armor and ancient weapons mounted on walls. Other vampires passed them in the corridors, all with that distinctive white hair and pale skin, and all of them bowed when they saw Vladislav. They ended up in a library that was bigger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound books and a fireplace large enough to stand in. Vladislav guided her to a plush sofa near the fire, then disappeared for a moment before returning with 2 glasses wine for her, blood for him. "I wanted you to see this place," he said as they settled together on the sofa, her body tucked against his side, "to understand my world, my life. This is what I'm offering you, Felicity, not just me, but all of this, a place at my side, as my partner, my equal." "I don't know anything about being a vampire queen," she protested weakly. "You'll learn, and you don't have to decide anything now." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I simply wanted you to see the possibilities." They spent the evening in the library, Vladislav showing her first editions and rare manuscripts, telling her stories about the centuries he'd lived through. At some point, Felicity fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from her week of double shifts, and when she woke, it was to find herself being carried through the hallways in Vladislav's arms. I can walk," she murmured sleepily. "I prefer carrying you." He shouldered open a door and stepped into what was clearly a bedroom. The bed was enormous, with dark curtains and silk sheets, and he laid her down gently before pulling a blanket over her. "Sleep here tonight. You're safe, I promise." "Where will you sleep?" "In my chambers down the hall." He stroked her hair back from her face. "Unless you'd prefer I stayed." "Stay," she said without thinking, then felt heat flood her cheeks. "I mean, just to sleep. We haven't. I understand." His smile was gentle. "Move over." He stretched out beside her on top of the blankets, fully clothed, and pulled her into his arms. She settled against his chest, listening to the steady, slow beat of his heart. Yes, vampires had heartbeats, just slower than humans, and felt safer than she ever had in her life. "Vladislav," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, my darling?" "I think I'm falling in love with you." His arms tightened around her. "Good, because I fell in love with you the moment you landed in my lap and looked at me without fear." She fell asleep, smiling. The next morning, Felicity woke to find Vladislav gone and a note on the pillow beside her. "Business matters to attend to. Make yourself at home. The staff will provide anything you need. V. She showered in the attached bathroom, which was bigger than her kitchen and living room combined, and borrowed a robe before venturing out to explore. A maid with white hair and gentle silver eyes found her almost immediately and introduced herself as Elena before offering to give her a tour. The castle was even more impressive in daylight. Elena showed her dozens of rooms, ballrooms and dining halls, armories and galleries, a music room with instruments from across centuries, and a modern kitchen that made Felicity's heart sing with its professional-grade equipment. Lord Vladislav doesn't eat human food, Elena explained, but he maintains the kitchen for guests and the human staff. Do you cook, Miss Zimmerman? I do, Felicity said, running her hand over the marble countertop. I'm a waitress, but I've always wanted to be a chef. Perhaps you could prepare something? I'm sure Lord Vladislav would be honored to have you use his kitchen. Felicity spent the afternoon cooking, losing herself in the familiar comfort of chopping and stirring and seasoning. She made a simple pasta dish with garlic and herbs, fresh bread, and a chocolate cake because she'd spotted the ingredients and couldn't resist. Elena and the other human staff members there were about a dozen, all well-paid and protected according to Elena joined her for lunch, and they treated her with a respect that made it clear they knew she was important to their lord. He's never brought a human here before, Elena confided as they ate. In all the years I've worked here, you're the first. It means something, Miss Zimmerman. It means everything. That evening, as the sun set, Felicity heard a commotion in the main hall. She left the library where she'd been reading and followed the sound of raised voices to find Vladislav facing off against another vampire. This one was male, with white hair like all the others, but eyes of burning gold, and he was radiating hostility. You cannot be serious, Vladislav, the stranger was saying. A human? You would bind yourself to a mortal when you could have your pick of any vampire in the territories? Careful, Constantine, Vladislav replied, his voice deadly soft. You're speaking about the woman I love. It's a mistake. She'll die in the blink of an eye, and you'll be left with nothing but grief. Is that what you want? Decades of happiness followed by centuries of mourning? That's my choice to make. It's a poor choice. The council won't approve. They'll see her as a weakness, a liability. Then the council can challenge me. Vladislav's eyes flashed dangerously. I am king, and I will choose my own mate. Constantine's gaze flicked past Vladislav and landed on Felicity. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. So this is the human. She doesn't look like much. Vladislav moved so fast he was a blur, and suddenly Constantine was against the wall with Vladislav's hand at his throat. Speak of her again in that tone, and I will rip your tongue from your mouth. Are we clear? Clear, Constantine choked out. Vladislav released him and turned to Felicity, his expression immediately softening. My darling, I apologize. You shouldn't have witnessed that. Who is he? Felicity asked, though she already knew the answer somehow. Constantine Valois, a member of my council and apparently a fool who doesn't know when to hold his tongue. Vladislav offered his arm. Come, let's leave him to his sulking. They walked back to the library in silence, but Felicity could feel the tension radiating off Vladislav. Once they were alone, she turned to face him. He's right, isn't he? About me being mortal. About me dying. Felicity, I'm going to get old while you stay young. I'll be wrinkled and gray and dying while you're still perfect and immortal. That's if we stay together, if we make this work. Is that really what you want? Vladislav pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. I want you, however I can have you, for however long I can have you. If that means 50 years with you growing old while I stay unchanged, then I'll treasure every moment and grieve when you're gone. But Felicity, there is another option. She pulled back to look at him. You mean turning me, making me a vampire? Yes, but that would be your choice, and only your choice. I would never force it on you, and you don't have to decide now. We have time. How much time? How long before your council decides I'm not worth the trouble? His jaw clenched. The council serves me, not the other way around. And anyone who threatens you will answer to me personally. Over the next few weeks, Felicity fell into a new rhythm. She still worked at the diner partly because she needed the money and partly because she liked the normalcy of it, but her free time was spent with Vladislav. She learned more about vampire society, met various members of his court, and slowly began to understand the complex political landscape he navigated daily. Not everyone was as hostile as Constantine, but it was clear that many vampires viewed her as a curiosity at best and a liability at worst. She was human in a world of immortals, fragile and temporary, and her relationship with their king made her both fascinating and dangerous. The danger became real about a month into their relationship. Felicity was walking home from the train station after a night shift when she sensed someone following her. She picked up her pace, hand digging in her bag for her phone, but before she could reach it, someone grabbed her from behind. A hand clamped over her mouth, cutting off her scream, and she was dragged into an alley. "The king's little pet," a male voice hissed in her ear. "Let's see how much you're really worth to him." There were 3 of them, all vampires, all with that distinctive white hair but with eyes of varying colors. They surrounded her in the alley, and even in her terror, Felicity recognized what this was: a test, a challenge, a way to strike at Vladislav through her. "He'll kill you for this," she managed to say, trying to keep her voice steady. "He'll have to find us first," one of them replied, grinning to show elongated fangs, "and by then you'll be drained dry." The first one lunged, and Felicity screamed. She never saw Vladislav arrive. One moment the vampire was reaching for her throat, the next he was across the alley, crumpled against the wall with his head at an unnatural angle. Vladislav stood in the center of the alley like an avenging angel, his eyes blazing crimson fire, his fangs fully extended, radiating such pure rage that even Felicity felt the urge to run. "You dared," he said, his voice echoing with inhuman power. "You dared to touch what is mine." The remaining 2 vampires tried to flee. They didn't make it 3 steps. Vladislav moved like lightning, and suddenly he was holding both of them by their throats, lifting them off the ground with inhuman strength. "Please, my lord," one of them gasped. "We were ordered—" "By whom?" Vladislav's grip tightened, and Felicity heard bone creak. "Constantine," the vampire choked out. He said she needed to be eliminated." Vladislav dropped them both, and before they could move, he'd ripped both their hearts from their chests. They collapsed into ash instantly, their bodies disintegrating until only clothes and dust remained. He turned to the first vampire, who was trying to crawl away despite his broken neck, and crushed his skull beneath his heel. Then he was at Felicity's side, his hands gentle as they cupped her face, his eyes searching her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they bite you? Felicity, talk to me." "I'm okay," she managed, though she was shaking violently. "You got here in time." "I felt your fear through our bond." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "The moment you were in danger, I knew. I'm sorry, my darling. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have protected you better." "You saved me." She clung to him, breathing in his scent, letting his presence calm her racing heart. "You saved me, Vladislav." He carried her back to the castle, not trusting her to walk, and settled her in his private chambers. Elena brought tea and blankets, and Vladislav sat beside her on the bed, refusing to let her go. "Constantine will die for this," he said quietly, his voice still edged with rage. "I'll summon the council tomorrow and execute him in front of them all. No one threatens what's mine and lives." "He did it because of me," Felicity said miserably, "because he thinks I make you weak." "You make me stronger." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You give me something to protect, something to cherish, something beyond power and politics. Don't ever think you're a weakness, Felicity. You're my greatest strength." "Then turn me." The words came out before she could stop them, but once they were spoken, she knew they were right. "Make me a vampire. Make me strong enough to stand beside you without being a target. Make me immortal." "Felicity, I mean it. I've been thinking about it anyway, but tonight proved it. I can't stay human in your world. I won't survive it, and I don't want to survive it without you." She took his hand, pressing it over her heart. "I love you, Vladislav. I want forever with you, not just a handful of mortal years. Turn me." He searched her face for a long moment, looking for doubt or fear. He must not have found any, because finally he nodded. "Are you certain? Once it's done, it cannot be undone. You'll be vampire for eternity." "I'm certain. Then we'll do it properly. Tomorrow night, after I deal with Constantine, I'll turn you in front of the entire court, and they'll witness you become my queen." His thumb brushed her lower lip. "You'll be magnificent, my darling, powerful and eternal, and mine." "Yours," she agreed, and kissed him. The next evening, the entire vampire court assembled in the grand hall of Nick's manor. Felicity stood beside Vladislav on the dais, wearing a gown that Elena had helped her into black silk that made her skin glow and her blonde hair shine. Every vampire in the territories was present, over 100 immortals gathered to witness their king's justice. Constantine was brought in chains, his face defiant even though he must have known he was facing execution. Vladislav had explained the charges to the court, his voice ringing through the hall with absolute authority. "Constantine Valois, you are charged with conspiracy to murder, with ordering an attack on a human under my protection, and with treason against your king. How do you plead?" "Guilty," Constantine spat, "and I'd do it again. She's a weakness, Vladislav. She'll destroy you." "No." Vladislav moved to stand directly in front of the chained vampire. "She'll be my salvation, and you'll never know it, because your existence ends here." He moved too fast for Felicity to track, and suddenly Constantine's head was separating from his shoulders, his body crumbling to ash before the pieces hit the ground. A ripple went through the assembled vampires, shock and fear in equal measure. "Let that be a lesson," Vladislav announced, turning to face his court. "Any who threaten Felicity Zimmerman threaten me directly. Any who seek to harm her will face the same fate as Constantine. She is under my protection, and soon she will be your queen." He returned to Felicity's side and took her hand. "Felicity has chosen to become one of us, to be turned, and to take her place at my side for eternity. Does anyone object?" Silence. Every vampire in the hall bowed their heads in acceptance. "Then witness," Vladislav said, and pulled Felicity into his arms. He'd explained what would happen, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. His fangs extended, longer and sharper than she'd ever seen them, and he bit into her throat with deliberate care. The pain was sharp and bright, but it faded quickly into something almost pleasurable as her blood flowed into him. She felt herself growing weaker, her heartbeat slowing, her vision dimming. Just when she thought she might slip away entirely, Vladislav pulled back. He bit into his own wrist and crimson blood welled up, dark and gleaming. "Drink, my darling. Drink and be reborn." She pressed her mouth to his wrist and drank. The blood was strange, cold, and metallic, but not unpleasant, and as it flowed into her, she felt power surge through her veins. Her heart gave one final beat, then stopped. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing, no breath, no pulse, just absolute stillness. Then her heart started again, slower but stronger, and when she opened her eyes, the world had transformed. She could hear every whisper in the hall, smell every individual vampire, see details she'd never noticed before. Strength flooded through her muscles, and when she looked down at her hands, her skin was already paling to that distinctive vampire white. "How do you feel?" Vladislav asked, his voice full of wonder and love. "Powerful," she breathed, and when she smiled, she felt her own fangs slide into place. "I feel incredible." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and the assembled court erupted into applause and cheers. When they finally broke apart, Vladislav turned to his people, keeping one arm around Felicity's waist. "I present to you Felicity Nix, my mate, my queen, and your sovereign lady. She will rule beside me, and you will honor her as you honor me." As one, every vampire in the hall dropped to one knee, heads bowed in submission and respect. Felicity looked out at them, at the immortal court that was now hers to command, and felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming joy and gratitude. She'd been a tired waitress living paycheck to paycheck, and now she was a vampire queen with eternity stretching before her. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment and learning. Felicity had to master her new vampire abilities, strength, speed, heightened senses, and the inevitable bloodlust that came with her transformation. Vladislav was patient and protective, teaching her control and helping her navigate her new existence. She learned to feed from donors without taking too much, to move with vampire speed without accidentally destroying things, and to use her enhanced senses without becoming overwhelmed. Elena proved invaluable, having served vampires for years, and several of the elder vampires in court offered their guidance as well. The political landscape shifted too. With Felicity as queen, several vampires who'd been on the fence about Vladislav's rule suddenly pledged their full support. She was proof that their king could bridge the gap between vampire and human worlds, that he wasn't locked into the old ways of doing things. Some still grumbled, of course, but after what happened to Constantine, no one dared challenge her position openly. Felicity also discovered that being turned had given her an unusual ability. Most vampires could sense emotions to some degree, but she could actually influence them, calming hostile vampires or strengthening positive feelings. Vladislav theorized it was because she'd been turned by a king, that his power had manifested differently in her, but whatever the reason, it made her invaluable in court politics. She used her gift carefully, never forcing anyone to feel something against their will. But in tense negotiations or heated arguments, a gentle push toward calm or understanding could make all the difference. The court began to see her not as a weakness, but as an asset, someone who complemented their king's strength with her own unique power. 2 months after her transformation, Felicity stood in the castle kitchen, her kitchen now, really preparing a meal for the human staff. She didn't eat human food anymore, surviving on blood like all vampires, but she still loved to cook. It was a connection to her old life, a reminder of who she'd been before everything changed. Vladislav found her there, flour dusting her hands as she kneaded bread dough. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're happy," he observed, not a question but a statement. "I am," she confirmed, leaning back against his chest. "Is that strange? I died and came back as something else entirely, but I'm happier than I've ever been." "Not strange at all. You found where you belong." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "As did I, the night you fell into my lap on that train. Best accident of my life. Mine as well." They stood like that for a while, comfortable in silence, until Elena appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, my lord, my lady, but there are visitors, members of the European Council, requesting an audience." Vladislav sighed. "More politics. They probably want to meet the new queen and assess whether she's worthy of her position." "Then let's not keep them waiting," Felicity said, wiping the flour from her hands. "Time to be royal and intimidating." The European delegation consisted of 5 ancient vampires, all over 1,000 years old, according to the information Elena had provided. They were led by a female vampire with hair like spun silver and eyes of deep purple, who introduced herself as Anastasia Volkov. "Lord Vladislav, Lady Felicity," Anastasia said, inclining her head in a gesture that was respectful, but not quite submissive. "Thank you for receiving us on such short notice." "Of course," Vladislav replied smoothly. "My court is always open to our European cousins. What brings you across the ocean?" "Curiosity, primarily." Anastasia's gaze settled on Felicity, assessing and sharp. "Word has reached us that you've taken a human mate and turned her. This is unprecedented for a king of your standing." "Felicity is no ordinary vampire," Vladislav said, his voice edged with warning. "She is my queen, my equal, and any who question her position question me directly." "Peace, Lord Vladislav. I meant no offense." Anastasia smiled slightly. "In fact, I'm impressed. It takes courage to break with tradition, and from what I sense, Lady Felicity possesses considerable power for one so newly turned." "I do my best," Felicity said, keeping her voice calm and confident despite the nervous flutter in her chest. These vampires were ancient, powerful, and they were here to judge whether she was worthy. "I'm still learning, of course, but I hope to serve my king and my people well." "Your people," Anastasia repeated thoughtfully. "You consider the vampires of North America your people, even though you were human until recently?" "I consider anyone under Vladislav's protection my people. That includes vampires, human donors, and the staff who serve this court." Felicity met the ancient vampire's gaze steadily. "I was human, yes, but I chose this life. I chose to be transformed, to stand beside Vladislav, and to help him build a better future for all of us." Something shifted in Anastasia's expression, approval perhaps. "Well said, young queen. I think you'll do well." She turned to Vladislav. "The European Council sends their congratulations on your mating and their support for your continued rule. We look forward to working with you both in the centuries to come." The delegation stayed for 3 days, during which Felicity had to navigate countless political conversations and subtle tests of her knowledge and power. She passed every challenge, partly through her own growing confidence and partly through Vladislav's unwavering support. He never left her side, never let her face the ancient vampires alone, and his faith in her gave her strength. On the final night, Anastasia requested a private audience with Felicity. They met in the library, and the ancient vampire studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You love him," Anastasia said finally. "Truly love him, not just the power and immortality he offers." "I love him more than anything," Felicity replied honestly. "I'd give it all up if it meant keeping him safe." "Good. Because what you have is rare, Lady Felicity. In my 1,000 years, I've seen countless vampire matings, but true love, that's precious and fragile, even among immortals." Anastasia leaned forward slightly. "Cherish it, protect it, and never let politics or power corrupt what you share." "I won't," Felicity promised. "I believe you." Anastasia rose to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. There are those in Europe who would seek to test Vladislav's strength through you. They'll see you as a weak point, a way to strike at him. Be vigilant and trust your instincts. You're stronger than you know." After the delegation left, life settled into a new normal. Felicity continued to grow into her role as queen, handling court business and helping Vladislav navigate the complex politics of vampire society. She also started a project that was close to her heart, establishing better protections and benefits for human donors and staff. "They serve us faithfully," she argued to the council during one meeting. "They deserve more than just payment. They deserve health care, education opportunities, and absolute protection from any vampire who might abuse them." There was some resistance, particularly from the older, more traditional vampires, but Felicity's gift for influencing emotions helped sway the council to her side. Within 3 months, she'd implemented a comprehensive program that became a model for other territories. Vladislav watched her work with undisguised pride and love. In the evenings, after court business was concluded, they would retreat to their private chambers and simply be together. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they made love, and sometimes they just held each other in comfortable silence. "Do you ever regret it?" Vladislav asked one night as they lay tangled together in bed. "Giving up your humanity, your old life?" "Never," Felicity replied without hesitation. "That life was just existing, surviving from one paycheck to the next. This is living. This is purpose and passion and love." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Do you regret turning me?" "Only that I didn't find you centuries ago." He pulled her down for a kiss, slow and deep and full of promise. "We could have had so much more time." "We have eternity now," she reminded him. "That's enough." A year after Felicity's transformation, the court gathered for a celebration. It was the anniversary of her turning, and vampire tradition dictated that the event be marked with ceremony and feasting. The grand hall was decorated with thousands of candles, and vampires from across the territories had come to honor their queen. Felicity wore a gown of deep crimson that matched Vladislav's eyes. Her white hair, which had fully transformed in the months after her turning, styled in elegant waves. She stood beside her king, greeting guests and accepting their congratulations, and felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "Happy?" Vladislav murmured, taking her hand. "Deliriously," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "Good, because I have something for you." He gestured, and Elena appeared with a velvet box. Vladislav took it and opened it to reveal a crown, delicate silver inlaid with rubies, clearly made to match his own crown of silver and black diamonds. "Vladislav," Felicity breathed, "it's beautiful. You've been my queen in truth for a year now. It's time you wore the crown." He lifted it from the box and placed it gently on her head. "Felicity Nix, queen of the North American territories, beloved of my heart and soul." The assembled vampires erupted in cheers and applause, and Felicity felt tears prick her eyes. She'd come so far from that exhausted waitress who'd accidentally sat on a stranger's lap. She'd found love, purpose, power, and a family in the most unlikely of places. Later that night, After the celebration had ended and the guests had departed, Felicity and Vladislav stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the grounds of Nick's manor. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the sky, and the world felt full of possibility. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Vladislav asked, his arm around her waist. "On the train, after you sat on my lap?" "I said a lot of things, most of them embarrassing." He laughed softly. "You apologized for falling on me, and I remember thinking that you shouldn't apologize for the best thing that had happened to me in 3 centuries. "I'm glad I fell," Felicity said, leaning into his embrace. "Best accident of my life." "Mine as well." He turned her to face him, his crimson eyes bright with love. "I've lived for over 300 years, Felicity, but I didn't truly live until I met you. You gave me purpose beyond power, joy beyond politics. You gave me everything." "You gave me the same," she replied, cupping his face in her hands. "I was just surviving before you. Now I'm thriving. Now I'm home." He kissed her then, tender and passionate, and in that moment, Felicity knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Every decision, every risk, every leap of faith had led her here, to this man, this life, this perfect moment of happiness. They had eternity ahead of them, countless centuries to love and laugh and build a future together. There would be challenges, certainly, politics and power struggles and threats from those who envied what they had. But they would face it all together, king and queen, partners in every sense of the word. The tired waitress who'd accidentally sat on a vampire king's lap was gone, transformed into something stronger and more powerful than she'd ever imagined. But the heart of who she was remained unchanged, someone who loved fiercely, who fought for what was right, and who cherished the unexpected miracle of finding her soulmate on a late-night train. As they stood together under the stars, Felicity sent a silent thank you to whatever force of fate or destiny had guided her to that train car, to that seat, to that perfect accidental moment that had changed everything. "I love you," she whispered against Vladislav's lips. "And I love you," he replied, his voice full of devotion and wonder. "For eternity, my darling Felicity, for all of eternity." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and somewhere in the distance, the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. They retreated inside before the sun could rise, hand in hand, hearts entwined, ready to face whatever the future held together. In the centuries that followed, they would become legendary. The king who broke tradition for love, and the queen who transformed from human to immortal and changed vampire society forever. Their reign would be marked by progress and prosperity, their love story told and retold among vampire and human alike. But that night, standing in the safety of their chambers as the sun rose on a new day, they were simply Vladislav and Felicity, 2 souls who'd found each other against all odds and chosen to spend forever together. And it was, in every sense of the word, perfect. The months turned into years, and Felicity grew into her power with grace and determination. She became known not just as Vladislav's queen, but as a force in her own right, respected for her wisdom, feared for her strength, and loved for her compassion. Under her influence, the North American territories flourished, with human-vampire relations reaching unprecedented harmony. She established the first vampire-human cultural exchange program, where humans could learn about vampire history and culture in a safe environment, while vampires were encouraged to understand and respect human perspectives. It was revolutionary, and while some of the older vampires grumbled about tradition, even they couldn't argue with the results. Violence against humans dropped dramatically, donor satisfaction increased, and the territories became a model for the rest of the vampire world. Vladislav supported her every step of the way, proud beyond measure of the woman his mate had become. Together, they traveled to other territories, meeting with vampire lords and ladies across the globe, always presenting a united front. Their love was evident in every glance, every touch, every word they spoke, and it became legendary. 3 years after her transformation, Felicity stood in the grand hall addressing the assembled court, now confident and commanding in her role. "We have an opportunity to reshape our world," she told them, her voice carrying easily through the space, "to move beyond the old ways of violence and fear and build something better, something lasting. but it requires all of us to be willing to change, to adapt, to grow. There were murmurs of agreement, some enthusiastic, others reluctant, but no one challenged her. Not after seeing the results of her policies, and certainly not with Vladislav standing beside her, his crimson eyes daring anyone to question his queen. Later, in their private chambers, Vladislav pulled her into his arms. "You were magnificent today," he murmured against her hair. "I've never been more proud." "I learned from the best," she replied, tilting her head up to kiss him. "You taught me everything I know about leadership and strength." "No, my darling, that was already inside you. I merely gave you the confidence to let it shine." His hand cupped her face tenderly. "You've changed my world, Felicity, changed me. I was a king before you, but now I'm something more, something better." "We're better together," she said softly. "Always have been, always will be." They made love that night with the passion and tenderness that had only deepened over the years, their bodies and souls perfectly in sync. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Vladislav's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin, he spoke of things they'd never discussed before. "I want to show you the world," he said quietly. "All of it. Every place I've been in 300 years, every city and country and wonder. I want to experience it all again through your eyes." "I'd love that," Felicity replied, excitement bubbling in her chest. "Where should we start?" "Venice," he decided. "It was my favorite city when I was young, before I became what I am. I want to share it with you." They began planning their trip the next day, arranging for the council to handle court business in their absence. It would be the first time Vladislav had left the territories for an extended period, a testament to how much trust he had in his people and how secure his rule had become. 3 weeks later, they stood on a balcony in Venice, overlooking the Grand Canal, as gondolas glided past beneath them. The city was beautiful at night, all glowing lights and ancient architecture, and Felicity felt like she'd stepped into a painting. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, leaning against Vladislav's chest as his arms encircled her. "It's perfect." "You're perfect," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is just a backdrop." They spent a month in Europe, traveling from Venice to Paris, from Paris to Prague, from Prague to the Scottish Highlands. Everywhere they went, local vampires welcomed them with honor and respect, hosting elaborate parties and ceremonies. But Felicity's favorite moments were the quiet ones, when it was just her and Vladislav exploring ancient streets hand in hand, or standing on cliff tops watching the stars. In Scotland, they visited the ruins of an old castle where Vladislav had lived for a decade in the 1800s. He showed her the chambers where he'd held court, the library where he'd studied, the tower where he'd watched countless sunsets before seeking shelter from the dawn. "I was lonely then," he admitted as they stood in what had once been the Great Hall. "Powerful and respected, but utterly alone. I used to wonder if I'd spend eternity like that, surrounded by people but never truly connecting with anyone." "You're not alone anymore," Felicity reminded him, squeezing his hand. "You'll never be alone again." "Neither will you," he promised, pulling her close. "We found each other against all odds, and nothing will ever separate us. Not politics, not enemies, not even time itself." "Forever," she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. They returned to Nick's Manor renewed and closer than ever, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And there were challenges, of course. A dispute with the Western Territories over hunting grounds required delicate negotiation. A group of young vampires trying to overthrow their lord in the South needed intervention. A human hate group targeting vampires in the Midwest needed to be dealt with carefully to avoid escalating tensions. But through it all, Vladislav and Felicity faced each obstacle together, their bond unshakable. They were partners in every sense, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. Where Vladislav was fierce and direct, Felicity was diplomatic and subtle. Where she sometimes doubted herself, he provided unwavering confidence. They were balanced, matched, perfect for each other. 5 years after her transformation, Felicity stood in the same library where Vladislav had first shown her his world, hosting a gathering of human leaders from the city. They'd come to discuss further integration between the human and vampire communities, a conversation that would have been impossible before Felicity became queen. Well, We're not asking humans to become donors, she explained patiently to the mayor, a middle-aged woman who looked both fascinated and nervous. We're simply proposing better communication channels. If vampires and humans understand each other better, we can avoid the misunderstandings and fear that lead to violence on both sides. But how can we trust that vampires won't abuse their power? The mayor asked. They're stronger, faster, immortal. The power imbalance is significant. Which is why we have laws and enforcement, Felicity replied. Any vampire who harms a human without just cause faces immediate execution. King Vladislav has made that abundantly clear. And humans who attack vampires face justice through human courts. We're working toward mutual respect and protection. The conversation continued for hours, but by the end, they'd reached an agreement. The city would establish a liaison office, staffed by both humans and vampires, to handle disputes and facilitate communication. It was another step toward the integrated society Felicity envisioned, and she felt a deep satisfaction as she showed the human delegates out. Vladislav found her afterward, still in the library, staring at the city lights through the window. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his embrace with a contented sigh. Another victory, he murmured. You're building the future, one conversation at a time. We're building it, she corrected. I couldn't do any of this without your support. You underestimate yourself, my love. You'd be remarkable no matter what. He turned her to face him, his crimson eyes soft with affection. But I'm honored to stand beside you while you change the world. I love you, she said, the words as natural as breathing, even though she said them a dozen times a day. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. And I love you, he replied, kissing her softly. Beyond reason, beyond measure, beyond anything I knew existed in this world. They stood together in the library, surrounded by centuries of knowledge and history, and Felicity marveled once again at how her life had transformed. From tired waitress to vampire queen, from struggling to survive to thriving with purpose, from alone to loved beyond measure, all because of one accidental moment on a late-night train. 10 years after her transformation, the vampire world gathered at Nick's Manor for a historic occasion, the first global vampire summit in 300 years. Lords and ladies from every territory on Earth came to discuss the future of their kind, and it was Felicity who'd organized it all. The grand hall was filled with hundreds of vampires, ancient and young, powerful and newly turned. They represented every bloodline, every culture, every perspective on how vampires should exist in the modern world. And at the head of it all, on twin thrones of silver and obsidian, sat Vladislav and Felicity. We stand at a crossroads, Felicity addressed the assembly, her voice clear and commanding. We can cling to the old ways, hunting and hiding, living in fear of discovery and extinction. Or we can adapt, evolve, and build a future where vampires and humans coexist peacefully. The choice is ours. The debates that followed were heated, passionate, sometimes almost violent. But Felicity navigated them all with skill and grace, using her gift to calm tensions when necessary and letting conflicts play out when productive. Vladislav supported her completely, his presence a reminder that she spoke with the full authority of one of the oldest and most powerful vampire kings in existence. By the end of the 3-day summit, they had reached a historic agreement, a set of global laws governing vampire behavior with enforcement mechanisms and consequences for violations. It wasn't perfect, and implementation would take decades, but it was a start. It was progress. As the delegates departed, many approached Felicity personally to thank her and express their respect. She'd won them over not through fear or power, but through reason, compassion, and an unwavering vision of a better future. You did it, Vladislav said that night as they finally retired to their chambers, exhausted but elated. You brought the vampire world together in a way no one has managed in centuries. We did it, she corrected, pulling him down onto the bed beside her. I'm just the face of it. You're the strength behind the throne. We're partners, he agreed, gathering her into his arms. In all things, always. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Felicity reflected on how far she'd come. 10 years ago, she'd been falling exhausted into a stranger's lap on a train, too tired to care about anything beyond getting home. Now, she was a queen who'd just shaped the future of an entire species. And through it all, through every triumph and challenge, Vladislav had been beside her. The years continued to pass, marked by achievements and quiet moments of joy in equal measure. Felicity became known across the vampire world as the architect queen, the visionary who'd reshaped their society. But to Vladislav, she was simply Felicity, his mate, his love, his heart. They faced threats together, celebrated victories together, and built a legacy that would endure for millennia. And every night, no matter what else was happening in their kingdom or their world, they made time for each other. Time to talk, to laugh, to love, to simply exist together in the perfect harmony they'd found. 20 years after that fateful night on the train, Felicity stood once again on the balcony of their chambers, watching the stars. Vladislav joined her, sliding his arms around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, echoing the question he'd posed so many years ago. "Not a single one," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "You gave me forever, and I'd choose it again in a heartbeat." "As would I," he murmured, lowering his mouth to hers for a kiss that held all the love and passion of their decades together. They had eternity ahead of them, countless centuries to love and build and grow. There would be new challenges, certainly. But whatever came, they would face it together, king and queen, partners and soulmates, bound by a love that had transcended death itself. And it all started because a tired waitress accidentally sat on a vampire king's lap on a late-night train, and he whispered 2 words that changed everything. "Don't move." She'd listened then, and in the years that followed, she'd built a life and a love beyond her wildest dreams. And as she stood in Vladislav's arms under the stars, Felicity knew with absolute certainty that she would never want to move from this place, this life, this love. They were home. They were together. And they would be for all eternity. Perfect.